In a small, quiet town surrounded by endless fields of corn and rolling green hills, life moved at its own unhurried pace. The kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, and the biggest event of the year was usually the annual pumpkin festival. It wasn't glamorous or flashy, but it had charm, something that made people feel grounded. For 24-year-old Mia Harper, this little town was both her home and her anchor. But while others might have found comfort in its simplicity, Mia often felt like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Mia worked long hours as a waitress at Dottie's Diner, a cozy spot known for serving greasy burgers, warm apple pies, and bottomless cups of coffee. Her uniform, a faded pink apron with the diner's logo stitched onto it, was almost always stained with ketchup or syrup. She didn't mind, though. She'd learned to take pride in hard work. Every tip she earned went toward paying bills, covering medical expenses for her mom, who was battling a chronic illness, and helping her younger brother finish high school. Life hadn't been easy for Mia, but she never complained. Instead, she smiled through the exhaustion, determined to keep moving forward. On one crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where golden leaves danced in the breeze and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke, something unusual happened. A sleek black car pulled into the diner's parking lot, its shiny surface reflecting the sunlight so brightly that it caught everyone's attention. People inside the diner craned their necks to see who could possibly be driving such an extravagant vehicle. When the door opened, out stepped a man dressed in an expensive suit. His presence commanded attention, not just because of his clothes, but because there was an aura of confidence about him. He looked out of place here, like a lion wandering into a flock of sheep. The man walked toward the entrance, followed closely by 3 other people, a middle-aged couple and a young woman who appeared to be his sister. They were all impeccably dressed, clearly not regulars at a humble diner like Dottie's. As they entered, the bell above the door jingled softly, announcing their arrival. Mia, who was wiping down a table nearby, glanced up briefly before returning to her task. To her, these visitors were just another group of customers, no different from anyone else she served every day. "Welcome to Dottie's," she said cheerfully, grabbing a menu from behind the counter. "Can I get you folks started with some drinks?" The man nodded politely and took a seat at one of the booths near the window. Up close, Mia noticed how striking he was. His dark hair was neatly styled, his jawline sharp, and his eyes, well, they seemed to hold a story. There was warmth there, but also a hint of sadness, as if he carried burdens too heavy for words. Still, Mia pushed those thoughts aside. She was used to reading people quickly. It came with the job. But today, something about him lingered in her mind longer than usual. As she scribbled down their drink orders, she overheard snippets of their conversation. The older woman mentioned something about the company and stock prices, while the younger one teased the man about needing a vacation. Mia pieced together that this guy must be important, maybe even famous, but she didn't dwell on it. After delivering their drinks, she returned to her usual routine, weaving between tables and chatting casually with the locals. It wasn't until later, when the man accidentally dropped his napkin and reached down to pick it up at the same time, Mia bent over to retrieve it, that their eyes met again. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. There was something magnetic about the way he looked at her, not judgmental or dismissive, like some wealthy people tended to be, but curious, like he genuinely wanted to know more about her. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice warm and sincere. "You're welcome," Mia replied with a smile, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She turned to leave but couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was somehow significant. Little did she know, it was only the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. Over the next hour, Mia continued to check on the table, refilling drinks and taking food orders. Each interaction left her feeling oddly intrigued. This man, whose name she later learned was Ethan, seemed different from the stereotype of rich, entitled businessman she'd seen on TV. He listened intently when his family spoke, laughed gently at their jokes, and occasionally stole glances out the window, lost in thought. It was clear he was wrestling with something heavy, though Mia couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. By the time the meal ended and the check arrived, Mia found herself lingering near their table longer than necessary. Something about Ethan drew her in, making her want to understand him better. And unbeknownst to either of them, fate had already begun weaving its threads, tying their destinies together in ways neither could have imagined. Over the next few weeks, Ethan kept coming back to Dottie's diner. At first, Mia thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe he liked the food or wanted to relive some childhood memory tied to the place. But as time went on, it became clear that his visits weren't random. He always sat in the same booth by the window, ordered the same meal, a cheeseburger with extra pickles and a side of fries, and lingered longer than most customers would. Sometimes he came alone. Other times he brought his family. But no matter who accompanied him, Mia couldn't help noticing how often his gaze drifted toward her. At first, she tried to brush it off. He's probably bored, she told herself, one evening as she cleared plates from his table. Or maybe he feels sorry for me because I'm running around like a chicken with its head cut off. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. There was a warmth in the way he smiled at her, a kindness in the way he asked how her day was going. It wasn't the kind of polite interest people showed out of obligation. It felt genuine, like he actually cared. One afternoon, after serving him his usual order, Mia decided to test the waters. She stopped by his booth with a refill of soda and asked casually, "So what brings you back here so much? You strike me as someone who could afford fancier places." Ethan chuckled, leaning back in the booth. "You're not wrong," he admitted, "but there's something about this place. It reminds me of simpler times, and besides..." He paused, looking up at her with a teasing glint in his eye. "The service is better than any five-star restaurant." Mia laughed, feeling a blush creep onto her cheeks. "Well, I'll take that as a compliment. Just don't tell my boss. I might start demanding a raise." Their banter grew easier with each visit. They talked about everything under the sun. Their favorite books, their dreams for the future, even silly things like whether pineapple belonged on pizza. They both agreed it absolutely did. Slowly but surely, a connection formed between them, a spark that neither could ignore. For Mia, it was refreshing to meet someone who treated her like an equal, someone who listened without judgment. And for Ethan, Mia represented a world he'd almost forgotten existed, one where people valued honesty and hard work over wealth and status. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One chilly evening, after a particularly busy shift, Mia noticed Ethan sitting alone in his usual booth. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped forward as if carrying an invisible weight. Something about his demeanor tugged at her heartstrings. Without thinking twice, she grabbed a fresh cup of coffee and slid into the seat across from him. "You look like you've had a rough day," she said gently, placing the steaming mug in front of him. "Care to share?" Ethan hesitated, staring into the dark liquid as though searching for answers. Finally, he sighed and said, "It's complicated. Work stuff mostly. Running a company isn't all glamour and private jets, you know. Sometimes it feels like I'm juggling 1,000 balls, and if I drop even one, everything falls apart." Mia nodded sympathetically. "I get that. Life can feel overwhelming sometimes. But hey, you're doing your best, and that's all anyone can ask for." Her words seemed to ease some of the tension in his expression. He gave her a small smile, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "Thanks. I needed to hear that." They sat there for a while, talking quietly about the pressures of responsibility and the importance of finding moments of peace amidst chaos. As the conversation wound down, Mia impulsively reached across the table and placed a hand on his arm. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly. "Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." In that moment, something shifted. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. The vulnerability in his eyes made her chest tighten. Before she could second-guess herself, she leaned in and kissed him lightly on the cheek, a gesture meant to comfort, nothing more. For a split second, the world seemed to freeze. Then, just as quickly, reality came crashing back. The sound of footsteps approaching snapped Mia out of her daze, and she turned to see Ethan's family walking through the diner door. His mother gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. His father's face hardened into a scowl, while his sister raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by the scene unfolding before them. Mia's stomach dropped. She hadn't meant for anyone to witness such an intimate moment, especially not Ethan's family. Panic bubbled up inside her as she realized how this must look. To them, she was just a waitress, someone far beneath their social standing. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, and she stammered out an apology before rushing off to tend to another table, leaving Ethan to deal with the fallout. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ethan stared after Mia, his mind racing. What had just happened? Why had her simple act of kindness stirred such strong emotions within him? And why did he suddenly feel like he'd been caught doing something forbidden? His mother broke the silence first. "Ethan, what is going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Who is that girl, and why are you letting her behave so familiarly with you?" Ethan opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss for words. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? All he knew was that Mia was different, special, and that he didn't want to let her go. But convincing his family of that wouldn't be easy. As the evening wore on, the awkwardness lingered. Ethan's father grilled him with questions, while his sister teased him relentlessly. Meanwhile, Mia avoided making eye contact, focusing instead on her tasks with robotic precision. By the time the family finally left, the atmosphere in the diner felt heavier than ever. That night, as Mia locked up the diner and walked home under the glow of streetlights, she replayed the incident over and over in her mind. Had she crossed a line? Would Ethan hate her now? She didn't regret comforting him. That part of her heart refused to apologize, but she feared the consequences of stepping into a world she didn't belong to. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a story that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and forgiveness. The days following that fateful evening at the diner were awkward, to say the least. Mia couldn't stop replaying the moment in her mind, the kiss on the cheek, the shocked expressions of Ethan's family, and the way she'd bolted like a startled deer afterward. It wasn't just embarrassment gnawing at her, it was fear. Fear that she'd ruined whatever fragile connection they had been building. Fear that Ethan would see her as nothing more than a clumsy waitress who didn't know her place. And most of all, fear that his family would convince him to cut ties with her for good. For Ethan, things weren't much easier. His mother hadn't stopped talking about the incident since they left the diner that night. "What were you thinking?" she kept asking, her voice laced with frustration. "Do you have any idea what people will say if word gets out? You're not some reckless teenager anymore, Ethan. You represent our family name." His father chimed in too, though his tone was colder, more calculating. "She's a nice girl, sure," he said one morning over breakfast. "But let's be realistic. Do you really think someone like her fits into your world? Into our world?" Ethan clenched, his jaw biting back a retort. He hated when his parents talked about people as though they were pieces in a game of chess, to be moved or discarded based on convenience. But deep down, their words planted seeds of doubt. Was he being foolish? Could someone from such a different background truly understand the complexities of his life? Despite the weight of his family's disapproval, Ethan found himself drawn back to the diner again and again. Something about Mia refused to leave his thoughts. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met before. There was a sincerity in her smile, a quiet strength in the way she carried herself despite the hardships she faced daily. He couldn't shake the feeling that she understood parts of him no one else did. When he walked into Dottie's the next time, Mia looked up from behind the counter, her eyes widening slightly when she saw him. There was a flicker of panic in her expression, but she quickly masked it with a polite smile. "Hey," she said softly, keeping her distance as she grabbed a menu. "The usual?" "Yeah," Ethan replied, sliding into his booth. "And, could we talk for a minute?" Mia hesitated, glancing around the nearly empty diner. The lunch rush had ended and only a few customers remained scattered across the room. Still, she felt exposed, vulnerable. What if this was the moment where everything fell apart? Taking a deep breath, she nodded and slid into the seat across from him. "I'm sorry about the other night," Ethan began, his voice low but earnest. "My family can be intense. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable because of them." Mia shook her head quickly. "No, it's my fault. I shouldn't have done what I did. I wasn't thinking." "You were just being kind," Ethan interrupted gently. "And honestly, I needed that, more than you realize." His words caught her off guard, and for a moment she forgot how to respond. Instead, she focused on smoothing out the wrinkles in her apron, buying herself time to gather her thoughts. "Still," she said finally, "I don't want to cause trouble for you. Your family clearly doesn't approve of me." "It's not about approval," Ethan insisted. "It's about what makes me happy. And spending time with you, it does make me happy." Mia's heart skipped a beat. She wanted so badly to believe him, to trust that their connection could overcome the barriers between them. But there was something she hadn't told him yet, something that might change everything. The weeks went by, their bond grew stronger. They started meeting outside the diner too, taking long walks along the riverbank or sitting on park benches while sharing stories about their lives. Ethan opened up about the pressure of running a billion-dollar company, the loneliness that came with success and the constant scrutiny from the media and his peers. In turn, Mia shared bits and pieces of her own struggles, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, caring for her sick mother, and trying to provide a better future for her younger brother. But there was one topic Mia carefully avoided: the truth about her father. Every time Ethan mentioned his company or his family's past, she changed the subject or feigned distraction. The guilt gnawed at her relentlessly, but she couldn't bring herself to confess. What if telling him shattered the fragile trust they'd built? What if it confirmed everything his family already thought about her? One evening, after a particularly heartfelt conversation about their dreams for the future, Ethan noticed a shift in Mia's demeanor. Her laughter seemed forced, her smiles tinged with sadness. Concerned, he reached out and took her hand. "Hey, what's going on? You seem distant tonight." Mia hesitated, her throat tightening as tears threatened to spill over. "There's something I need to tell you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Ethan frowned, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "Whatever it is, you can tell me. You know that, right?" She nodded, though doubt clouded her eyes. Taking a shaky breath, she began to speak. "Years ago, when I was just a kid, my dad got into some serious trouble. He stole money. A lot of it. From your company." The words hung in the air like thunderclouds, heavy and suffocating. Ethan stared at her, stunned. Memories of the scandal flooded back. The embezzlement case that had nearly destroyed Caldwell Industries before he took over and rebuilt it. "Your dad," he murmured, piecing it together. "That was your family?" Tears streamed down Mia's face, now unchecked and raw. "I didn't know until later what he'd done. By then it was too late. My mom fell ill, we lost everything, and he disappeared, leaving us to pick up the pieces. I've spent years trying to move past it, to prove that I'm not defined by his mistakes. But I understand if you can't forgive me for not telling you sooner." Ethan sat silently, his mind racing. Part of him felt betrayed that she'd kept this secret from him. But another part, a bigger part, felt overwhelming compassion. He saw the pain in her eyes, the shame she carried every day. This wasn't just her father's story. It was hers too. And she had paid the price in ways he couldn't even imagine. Reaching out, he wiped away her tears with his thumb. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said firmly. "None of this is your fault. I'm not mad at you, Mia. I'm mad at the situation, at the fact that you've had to carry this burden alone for so long." Relief washed over her, but also disbelief. How could he be so understanding? So forgiving? "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because once your family finds out, they'll deal with it," Ethan interrupted, his tone resolute. "We'll Figure it out together. All that matters is that you're honest with me now, that's enough. In that moment, Mia realized something profound. Ethan wasn't just offering her forgiveness, he was offering her a chance to rewrite her story, to step out of the shadow of her father's sins and into the light of a new beginning. It wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. As they sat there under the fading twilight, holding hands and facing the unknown together, Mia knew one thing for certain. Love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing to stand beside someone, flaws and all, and believing in the possibility of something beautiful. The days after Mia's confession were a whirlwind of emotions for both her and Ethan. For Mia, the weight of finally sharing her secret felt like a mix of relief and dread. On one hand, she was glad to have unburdened herself, to no longer carry the lie, or at least the omission that had hung over her head like a storm cloud. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the fear that this truth might still drive a wedge between them. What if Ethan changed his mind? What if his family's disapproval became too much for him to handle? For Ethan, the revelation about Mia's father forced him to confront his own feelings. He'd always prided himself on being fair and level-headed, but this situation tested those qualities in ways he hadn't anticipated. His initial reaction was shock, not just because of the connection between Mia's family and his company, but because of the depth of Mia's suffering. She wasn't responsible for her father's actions, yet she'd shouldered the consequences as if they were her own. It made him angry, not at her, but at the unfairness of it all. Still, Ethan knew this wasn't something he could ignore or sweep under the rug. If their relationship was going to move forward, his family needed to know the full story. The thought of confronting them filled him with anxiety, but he also understood that hiding the truth would only make things worse in the long run. So after much deliberation, he decided to bring Mia to dinner at his parents' house. It wasn't just about introducing her. It was about facing the past head-on and proving to everyone, including himself, that love could transcend even the most complicated circumstances. The evening of the dinner arrived quicker than either of them expected. Mia spent hours getting ready, trying to calm her nerves by focusing on small details, choosing an outfit that struck the right balance between casual and respectful, practicing what she would say when the inevitable questions came, and reminding herself to breathe. By the time Ethan picked her up, she was a bundle of tension, her hands gripping the strap of her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You look beautiful," Ethan said softly as he opened the car door for her. "And you don't need to be nervous, we'll get through this together." Mia managed a shaky smile. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one who has to face your judgmental billionaire family." Ethan chuckled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "They're not monsters, Mia. Just set in their ways. But I promise, I won't let anyone hurt you." As they drove to his parents' estate, a sprawling mansion surrounded by manicured lawns and towering oak trees, Mia felt like she was walking into a lion's den. Every step closer to the house made her heart race faster. When they pulled up to the grand entrance, a uniformed valet greeted them, taking the keys from Ethan with a polite nod. As they walked inside, Mia couldn't help but marvel at the opulence around her, crystal chandeliers dripping from the ceiling, marble floors gleaming underfoot, and walls adorned with expensive artwork. It was a world completely foreign to her, one that highlighted just how different their lives truly were. Ethan's family was waiting for them in the dining room, seated around a long mahogany table laden with fine china and silverware. His mother looked immaculate in a tailored dress, her expression unreadable. His father sat at the head of the table, his posture stiff and commanding, and his sister, ever the wild card, wore a smirk that suggested she was ready for drama. "Good evening," Ethan said brightly, pulling out a chair for Mia before taking his own seat. "Thank you for having us." His mother nodded curtly, eyeing Mia with thinly veiled curiosity. "It's nice to see you again," she said, her tone polite but distant. "Though I must admit, we didn't expect such a formal visit, too." Swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet the older woman's gaze. I appreciate you inviting me into your home. I know this is probably unexpected, but I wanted to explain some things, to clear the air. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Ethan reached under the table and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Taking a deep breath, Mia launched into her story. She started from the beginning, explaining how her father had been a good man once, working hard to provide for his family, but somewhere along the way, desperation had driven him to make terrible choices. He didn't mean to destroy anyone's life, Mia said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. He was drowning, and instead of asking for help, he did something reckless, something selfish. Her words painted a vivid picture of the aftermath, the shame, the poverty, the endless struggle to rebuild their lives without him. She spoke of nights spent worrying about her mother's medical bills and mornings waking up early to work multiple jobs while keeping her grades high enough to graduate. She described the loneliness of carrying a secret that felt too big to share with anyone. When she finished, the room was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the ornate clock on the wall. Ethan's father leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed as he processed what he'd heard. His mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a napkin, though whether it was from sympathy or disdain, Mia couldn't tell. Only Ethan's sister broke the silence, clapping her hands slowly. Well, that was quite the sob story, she said, her tone laced with sarcasm. But let's be real here. Your dad nearly ruined our family business. Do you really think we can just forgive and forget? Mia flinched, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Before she could respond, Ethan stepped in. That's enough, he said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Mia isn't responsible for what her father did. Blaming her for his mistakes is wrong, and you know it. His sister raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by his outburst. Oh, relax, Ethan. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. No, you're not, Ethan shot back. Turning to his parents, he continued. Look, I know this isn't easy to hear. Trust me, I've spent years dealing with the fallout of that scandal. But Mia isn't her father. She's worked harder than anyone I know to overcome the obstacles life threw at her. And if you can't see that, then maybe the problem isn't with her, it's with us. His words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, surprisingly, his mother cleared her throat and leaned forward. You're right, she admitted quietly. We've judged her unfairly. None of this is her fault. Mia blinked, stunned by the sudden shift. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. I never meant for any of this to happen. All I want is a chance to prove that I'm more than my past. Ethan's father sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as if warding off a headache. This is complicated, he said gruffly. But I suppose holding a grudge against someone who had nothing to do with it serves no purpose. It wasn't exactly forgiveness, but it was a start. Over the course of the meal, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, though the underlying tension remained. Mia did her best to engage politely, answering questions about her dreams and ambitions. By the end of the night, she felt drained, but hopeful. While she knew earning their trust would take time, she also sensed that a door had been cracked open. One she could walk through if she kept showing them who she really was. As Ethan drove her home later that night, Mia rested her head against the window, watching the stars twinkle above. That went better than I expected, she murmured, half to herself. Ethan smiled, reaching over to take her hand. See, I told you we'd get through it together. She squeezed his fingers, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't alone anymore. The weeks following the dinner at Ethan's family estate were a delicate balancing act for Mia and Ethan. While the initial confrontation had opened the door to understanding, it didn't magically erase years of prejudice or deeply ingrained beliefs about class and status. Ethan's parents, though willing to give Mia a chance, still approached her with caution, a polite distance that made her feel like she was walking on eggshells every time they interacted. His sister, ever the skeptic, continued to make snide remarks whenever the opportunity arose. But despite these challenges, Mia refused to let doubt creep in. She reminded herself daily that progress took time, especially when it came to mending broken bridges. For Ethan, the experience had only strengthened his resolve. He admired Mia's resilience, the way she carried herself with grace even when others doubted her intentions. It wasn't just her strength that drew him in. It was her heart. Every interaction with her revealed another layer of her character. How she always put others first, how she found joy in the smallest victories, and how she never lost sight of her dreams no matter how far out of reach they seemed. But Ethan also knew that actions spoke louder than words. If he truly wanted to stand by Mia, he needed to prove it, not just to her but to his family and himself. So, he began making subtle changes in his life, ones that reflected the values Mia embodied. He started volunteering at community centers, using his resources to support local initiatives aimed at helping struggling families. He encouraged Mia to pursue her dream of opening a safe space for kids in their town, a place where they could learn new skills, receive mentorship, and find a sense of belonging. Together, they brainstormed ideas, drafted plans, and sought funding from organizations eager to back such a meaningful project. Mia, meanwhile, focused on proving herself not just to Ethan's family, but to everyone who doubted her. She threw herself into her work at the diner, determined to show that her background didn't define her. When customers complimented her friendly demeanor or left generous tips, she saw it as validation, not because she craved approval, but because it reminded her that kindness mattered more than wealth or titles. On her days off, she spent hours researching grants and scholarships, determined to further her education so she could one day run her own nonprofit. Her ambition inspired those around her, including Ethan, who often joked that she worked harder than anyone he'd ever met. One evening, after a particularly long shift at the diner, Mia met Ethan outside under the flickering neon sign. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and rain-soaked earth. She leaned against the hood of his car, exhausted but content. "I think I finally figured out what I want my center to focus on," she said, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "What's that?" Ethan asked, handing her a steaming cup of coffee he'd picked up earlier. "Empathy," she replied without hesitation. So many problems in the world come from people not understanding each other. If we can teach kids to listen, to care, to see beyond themselves, imagine the difference it could make. Ethan smiled, shaking his head in admiration. "You're incredible, you know that? Most people talk about changing the world, but you actually believe you can do it." "Well, someone has to start somewhere," she teased, nudging him playfully. "Besides, I've got a pretty good partner in crime now." Their laughter echoed softly in the quiet night, a reminder of how far they'd come since their awkward beginnings. But even in moments like this, Mia couldn't ignore the lingering fear that things might fall apart. What if Ethan's family decided they couldn't accept her after all? What if the pressure became too much for either of them to handle? Her worries weren't unfounded. A few days later, Ethan received a call from his father requesting an urgent meeting. Nervous but determined, he agreed to meet him at Caldwell Industries headquarters, a towering skyscraper that loomed over the city skyline. As he stepped into his father's office, he braced himself for whatever lecture awaited him. "Sit down," his father said gruffly, gesturing toward a chair across from his desk. His tone was clipped, his expression unreadable. Ethan complied, folding his hands in his lap. "What's this about?" His father leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany surface. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night about Mia, about giving her a chance." Ethan tensed, unsure whether to feel hopeful or defensive. And I'll admit I may have underestimated her." The admission came, reluctantly, like pulling teeth. "She's clearly not the person I assumed she was, but that doesn't change the fact that your relationship is complicated. People will talk, Ethan. They'll judge you based on who you choose to be with." "That's their problem, not mine," Ethan shot back, his voice firm. "I don't care what anyone says about me. All I care about is being with someone who makes me a better person. And that's exactly what Mia does." His father sighed, rubbing his temples as if warding off a headache. "You remind me of myself at your age. Headstrong, idealistic, convinced you know best. But let me tell you something. Love isn't just about passion or chemistry. It's about partnership, about building something that lasts. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of commitment? Ethan hesitated, considering the question carefully. Then he nodded. Yes. I've never been sure of anything in my life. Something in his conviction must have struck a chord because his father's demeanor softened slightly. All right then. If she's worth fighting for, then fight. Just remember, that girl is going to need your support more than you realize. Back at the diner later that week, Mia noticed a change in Ethan's demeanor. He seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. When she asked him about it, he simply smiled and said, "Let's just say my dad and I had a long overdue conversation. Things are looking up." Mia raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. "Does that mean I'm officially part of the family now?" Ethan laughed, leaning in to kiss her forehead. "Not quite yet, but we're getting there." As winter approached, bringing with it snowflakes that dusted the rooftops and streets, Mia and Ethan grew closer than ever. Their shared vision for the future, a future built on trust, empathy, and mutual respect, became a beacon of hope in a world that often felt divided. They attended holiday gatherings together, introduced Mia to Ethan's extended family, and even hosted a small fundraiser for her community center idea. Slowly but surely, walls began to crumble, replaced by bridges forged through honesty and perseverance. Of course, challenges remained. There were still whispers behind closed doors, moments of doubt when Mia wondered if she was truly worthy of the life Ethan offered her. But each time those fears surfaced, Ethan was there to remind her of her worth. "You're stronger than you think," he'd say, his voice steady and unwavering. "And you've already proven that love can conquer anything." By the time spring rolled around, the town buzzed with anticipation for the grand opening of Mia's community center, a dream that had once felt impossibly distant but was now within reach. With Ethan by her side and a growing network of supporters cheering her on, Mia realized that the journey wasn't just about overcoming obstacles. It was about discovering who she was meant to be and finding someone who loved her for exactly that person. Little did they know, the best chapter of their story was yet to come. Spring arrived with a burst of warmth and color, painting the small town in shades of green and gold. The trees sprouted new leaves, flowers bloomed along the sidewalks, and there was a sense of renewal in the air that matched the energy buzzing through Mia's life. After months of hard work, planning, and collaboration, her dream, the community center, was finally ready to open its doors. It wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of hope, resilience, and second chances. And standing beside her every step of the way was Ethan, whose unwavering support had turned what once felt impossible into reality. The day of the grand opening dawned bright and clear, with the sun casting long shadows across the freshly painted walls of the center. Volunteers bustled around, setting up tables, arranging chairs, and hanging colorful banners that read, "Welcome," in bold letters. Kids from the neighborhood peeked curiously through the windows, their faces lighting up as they caught glimpses of art supplies, books, and musical instruments waiting inside. For many of them, this place would become a sanctuary, a space where they could dream without limits and grow without judgment. Mia stood near the entrance, adjusting the ribbon tied around her waist nervously. She wore a simple dress she'd picked out weeks ago, one that made her feel both confident and approachable. Her hair was pulled back into a loose braid, and though her hands trembled slightly, her smile radiated pure joy. This moment meant everything to her, not just because it marked the culmination of months of effort, but because it represented something bigger, proof that kindness, determination, and love could overcome even the toughest odds. Ethan watched her from a short distance, his heart swelling with pride. He couldn't help but marvel at how far she'd come since the first time he'd walked into Dottie's diner. Back then, she'd been hesitant, guarded, carrying the weight of secrets, too heavy for anyone to bear alone. Now she stood tall, unafraid to let the world see who she truly was. To him, she was breathtaking, not because of perfection, but because of authenticity. As guests began arriving, the parking lot filled with cars belonging to friends, neighbors, local officials, and members of Ethan's family. His parents stepped out of their sleek black sedan, dressed impeccably as always, but wearing expressions softer than usual. Over the past few months, they'd slowly warmed to Mia, attending events she hosted and volunteering their time to help prepare for the center's launch. While they still harbored some reservations about her background, they couldn't deny the impact she'd had on their son, or on the community. Ethan greeted them warmly, ushering them toward the entrance. "You're going to love this," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "It's everything Mia dreamed it would be." Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Children darted between displays, giggling as they explored every corner of the space. Parents chatted animatedly, marveling at the resources available to their families. Local leaders delivered speeches praising Mia's vision and dedication, while Ethan stood quietly in the background, letting her take center stage. When it came time for her to speak, Mia stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady despite the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, scanning the crowd with gratitude in her eyes. "This center is more than just four walls and a roof. It's a promise to our kids that they matter, that their dreams are worth chasing, and that no matter where they come from, they have the power to shape their own futures." Her words resonated deeply, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement from the audience. As she wrapped up her speech, she turned to look directly at Ethan, her voice softening. "And I want to thank someone very special. Without his belief in me, none of this would have been possible. He taught me that love isn't about where you come from. It's about who you choose to stand beside. So thank you for everything." The room erupted in applause, but Ethan barely noticed. All he could focus on was Mia, standing there like a beacon of light, her gaze locked onto his. In that moment, he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left and the cleanup crew took over, Ethan pulled Mia aside. They wandered outside, away from the noise and commotion, until they reached a quiet spot under a tree near the edge of the property. Fireflies blinked lazily in the twilight, their golden glow reflecting off Mia's face as she looked up at him curiously. "What is it?" she asked, tilting her head with a playful smile. "You look like you're about to drop a bombshell." Ethan chuckled, though his expression remained serious. Kneeling down on one knee, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside lay a delicate ring, its diamond catching the fading sunlight. Mia gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands as tears welled up in her eyes. "I know we face challenges," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know there will be more ahead. But none of that matters if we're together. You've shown me what it means to truly live, to give selflessly, to love fearlessly, and to never stop believing in the goodness of people. So, Mia Harper, will you marry me?" For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a laugh that dissolved into sobs, Mia nodded furiously. "Yes, of course, yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, pulling her into a tight embrace as cheers erupted from nearby volunteers who'd witnessed the proposal. Their kiss was sweet and tender, sealing a bond forged through trials and triumphs alike. In the weeks that followed, preparations for their wedding brought the entire town together. Neighbors pitched in to decorate the venue, a charming garden nestled between rolling hills, and donated food, flowers, and handmade gifts. Even Ethan's family embraced the occasion wholeheartedly, helping organize details and ensuring the day felt magical for everyone involved. On the morning of the wedding, Mia woke up feeling lighter than she ever had before, surrounded by loved ones, including her mother, who had grown stronger thanks to Mia's relentless care. She got ready with a sense of calm certainty. This was it, the start of a new chapter, one written with trust, forgiveness, and boundless love. When she walked down the aisle, escorted by her younger brother, her eyes locked onto Ethan's. Standing beneath an arch adorned with wildflowers, He looked at her like she was the only person in the world, as they exchanged vows, promising to support, cherish, and uplift each other through all of life's twists and turns. Their connection felt almost palpable, a force that transcended words. After the ceremony, as they danced under strings of twinkling lights, Mia rested her head against Ethan's shoulder. "Do you think we'll ever stop surprising each other?" she asked softly. He smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I hope not. Life's better when there's a little magic left to discover." And as they swayed to the music, surrounded by laughter, love, and the promise of brighter tomorrows, they knew they'd already found theirs. Together, they had proven that even the most unlikely stories could lead to something extraordinary. A love strong enough to rewrite the past and build a future full of endless possibilities.